Good morning, Wadzi.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. And on behalf of the Secretariat to the Convention on Biological Diversity, I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this launch webinar for our new publication, the Training Manual on Detection and Identification of Living Modified Organisms in the context of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. This training manual, as approved by our parties during their 9th meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh, helps us to address issues of capacity building under the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. We are pleased and privileged to have the Deputy Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Mr. David Cooper, who is joining us this morning. Mr. Cooper, in his opening remarks, will also launch this important new tool. So over to you, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much. Wadzi, can you hear me well?
Loud and clear.
So thank you and good day, colleagues. It's a great pleasure on behalf of Elizabeth Marema, the Executive Secretary, and all my colleagues here at the CBD Secretariat to welcome you to this webinar today to launch our new publication in the Biodiversity Technical Series. It's number 5, Training Manual on the Detection and Identification of Living Modified Organisms in the context of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. As Wadzi mentioned, this publication responds directly to the requests from the parties to the Cartagena Protocol for training materials to be developed for the field of detection and identification of living modified organisms. It also contributes directly to several operational objectives of the strategic plan for the protocol for the period 2011 to 2020. I'd like to acknowledge and thank very much the members of the network of laboratories for the detection and identification of LMOs and the European Commission Joint Research Centre for their contributions in producing this training manual of a very high scientific quality. I'd also like to thank all those experts and parties that were involved in the review at various stages of this document. And of course, I'd also like to thank my colleagues in the CBD Secretariat for initiating this work. This publication, I think, comes at a critical moment as biotechnology continues to rapidly develop and mature. There's an urgent need to support parties in their implementation of the protocol. Detection and identification of LMOs provides science-based tools to facilitate the application of the protocol. And so this training module, we believe, can help to enhance global capacity building through improved access to information and strengthen the operation of the protocol. The manual serves as a single source of information covering a complete workflow from sampling to molecular analysis and reporting. Various users, whether it be laboratory personnel, customs officials, researchers, regulators, or students, can begin to build their proficiency to detect and identify LMOs. As users deepen their knowledge of the cross-cutting nature of detection and identification, the safe handling, transfer, and development and use of biotechnology can be realized. And so we hope that the application of national biodiversity frameworks will be strengthened and parties will be technically supported in their response to new developments in the field of biotechnology. Further parties will more confidently contribute to global commerce and value chains in agriculture and elsewhere with an ability to meet international standards and verify shipments. Moreover, the broad applicability of the tools can also facilitate additional activities in other fields related to detection and identification. For example, national laboratories may be able to further apply their knowledge of these tools to monitor pathogenic or invasive organisms. promoting synergies in a holistic health approach for humans, animals and plants and the overall environment. I'll also explain how your COVID tests work, I believe. As the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity and to the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety look towards 2050, the science-based tools of detection and identification can play a key role in the implementation of the biotechnology-related provisions in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and support the implementation plan for the protocol as well. Thus, having key resources available now, we hope will support scientific and technical cooperation and help more actors to responsibly use and manage biotechnology, while society's needs are met and the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature is achieved. So I look forward now to the introduction to the manual and to some discussion among the participants. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, David. And with those remarks, we will now consider that the training manual is officially launched. Because it's virtual, I will have to launch it myself and hope that the others are clapping along with me. So the manual is now officially launched, and thank you very much. We will now go on to introducing the manual to you all, and you'll have an opportunity to ask any questions you may have using the chat functionality on the side. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact the Secretariat. This webinar will run for 1.5 hours, and we have selected a number of speakers who will introduce the important tool and provide participants with some insight on this tool, and more importantly, promote its use in laboratories around the world. As Mr. Cooper has said, this manual is part of an overarching architecture for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and implementation plan of the Biosafety Protocol, in that it helps us all to ensure and assist with scientific cooperation and technology transfer. Without wasting any more time, I will now ask the Program Officer responsible for the manual, Mr. Austin McLaughlin, to provide the introduction to this manual. Over to you, Austin, and thank you, David.
Let me just share my screen. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
It's clear, Austin. Go ahead.
Perfect. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Austin McLaughlin. I'm the Associate Program Management Officer in charge of the detection and identification of living modified organisms under the Cartagena Protocol within the Secretariat. And I am pleased to introduce the manual to you all. Detection and identification provides a science-based tool to facilitate the application of several articles of the protocol. For example, Article 17, Unintentional Transboundary Movements and Emergency Measures, as well as Article 18, Transport Handling, Packaging and Identification, among others. However, the majority of decisions related to detection and identification have come under Articles 17 and 18. Some important and relevant decisions related to detection and identification include Decision BS59, which established the network of laboratories for the detection and identification of LMOs, with the goal to work towards elements of the operational objectives of the strategic plan for the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety for the period 2011 to 2020. However, it's also important to understand that elements of detection and identification also can be found within the framework and action plan for the capacity building for the effective implementation of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. So zooming in and focusing on the strategic plan for the protocol, there are three operational objectives that three operational objectives that are directly related to detection and identification. Operational objective 1.6, easy to use and reliable technical tools for detection of unauthorized LMOs are developed and made available. Operational objective 1.8, guidance developed to assist parties to detect and take measures to respond to unintentional releases of LMOs. And operational objective 2.3, personnel are trained and equipped for sampling, detection, and identification of LMOs. So with this in mind, the MOP in their 7th meeting requested the online network of laboratories to continue working on issues relevant to detection and identification with a view of achieving the operational objectives of the strategic plan relevant to the implementation of Article 17. So with this in mind, the network of laboratories convened and developed an action plan for capacity building activities. Following the development of this action plan, the Secretariat, along with contributions from the European Commission Joint Research Center and the network of laboratories, developed the first draft of this training manual, which was presented to the 8th meeting of MOP in Cancun, which took note of the training manual. However, it also requested further work to be done on this training manual in collaboration with the network of laboratories. It also requested that draft versions be made available in all UN languages for consideration at the next COP MOP. The Secretariat then convened the network of laboratories to work further on this draft training manual and presented an advanced draft at the 9th meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh of MOP to review and finalize this detection manual, ensuring consistency in language and scope with Article 17 of the Cartagena Protocol. So I am pleased to say that the Secretariat has finalized its work and has published this training manual as Biosafety Technical Series 5, which was made available on the Biosafety Clearinghouse as Virtual Library Resource Record 260177. It's important to note that the translations of the manual, so Arabic, Chinese, French, Russian, and Spanish, are forthcoming, and the Secretariat will publish the final versions on the same VLR record as soon as they're available. This publication comes at an important time as parties are negotiating the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as the implementation plan for the protocol. So we're pleased to have a resource available within the field of detection and identification. The manual itself covers 6 modules. So the first module is overview of biosafety in the Cartagena Protocol. I lightly touched on this during my presentation. However, I encourage everyone to go and read the module to get a better sense of these topics. The rest of the manual, the other 5 modules, are more technical in nature. So they include an overview of detection and identification of living modified organisms in Module 2. Module 3, sample preparation and extraction. Module 4, techniques for detection and identification. Module 5, introduction to quality assurance, quality control standards. And finally, Module 6 on reporting. The other speakers today will be overviewing these more technical modules. But with this, I would like to thank you for attending our webinar. And if you have any questions, you can email us or contact us through any of our social media pages or email. And I encourage you to visit the new BCH platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Austin, and thank you for introducing this manual and for all your hard work in putting this webinar together. So colleagues, you've seen that the manual covers a lot of very important and interesting elements that go between the policy and the technical aspects as well. So it certainly is a resource not only for the laboratories, but also for the policymakers. Now to get into the substance of the manual, I will ask the next speaker, and this is Magdalena Coesi, who's the Head of Knowledge for Health and Consumer Safety at the European Commission. Magdalena, we even have you on screen today.
Yes.
So thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me first try to share my screen. Do you see my first slide?
Yes, and it's in PowerPoint, in presentation mode. So go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Do you see also the small screen?
The small screen where, sorry?
You see okay, right?
Yes, we see your presentation clearly, and yourself.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. First of all, I would like to thank the Secretariat not only for allowing us to contribute to this user manual, but also for inviting me today to present and explain the contributions the JRC could make to this very important, very good, and very complete and exhaustive document. Why the JRC? The JRC is a joint research center, is a Directorate General of the European Commission, which is a scientific arm of the European Commission and has a mandate to provide scientific and technical support to the Commission throughout the whole policy cycle. It's, of course, with focus on Europe, is located in 5 different countries and embrace a wide variety of areas, expertise, and provide support in different fields. In particular, the Directorate on Health, Consumer and Reference Material is the one that has been mostly involved on the topic that is presented today and is the one in which I work, has a huge experience in standardization, production of reference material, validation of reference standards and reference methods, in proficiency testing organization to test, to allow a laboratory to test their competence, and in the publication of guidance document. It is done this in a wide varieties of fields, including for GMO/LMOs. The support that JRC does is, of course, primarily to the EU legal frame, and as I said, produce reference material, which is a mandatory requirement for the approval of every genetically modified organism in EU, and the information has to be made published in the community register for GM food and feed. But in particular, it hosts the European Union Reference Laboratory for GM Food and Feed, which has in Europe the task of officially validating the methods for detection, identification, and quantification as a mandatory requirement for the authorization process of any GMO in Europe. And it provides also control laboratories with the required control samples. In addition, the URL has a role in the feed and food law in relation to official control, so as to coordinate all the national reference laboratories in Europe and make sure that they have the proper analytical methods, they properly apply them, they have a quality system in place with the organization of comparative testing, and have the proper training. So the URL has a mandate to provide support primarily in Europe, but also outside European countries. And that is indeed what has been done actually since the 2000. That was a year in which we started with the first training courses on the analysis of food and feed sample for the presence of genetically modified organisms, with the release of the first version of ad hoc prepared didactic material. The manual has also been translated in several languages, the same that you are considering, by the way, and has been updated in several years, with the last time in the 2020. And the expertise accumulated with more than, I don't know, 50, 60 probably, training courses dedicated to trainees from more than 300 laboratories worldwide. That is the expertise, that is the input that allow us to contribute to the manual you are launching today. So what will you find in the manual? As it was indicated, the manual is very comprehensive, covers a huge amount, actually all the different aspects that are required for a proper understanding of what LMO is, which are the characteristics, how they are produced, and accordingly to that, how they can be detected. The module number 2 provides this overview in relation to how modern technology is used for the production of LMOs, which are the specific characteristics and the steps, and in particular, which are the characteristics that that allow us to identify them. Normally, we talk about two major categories: the DNA-based methods that detect the specific piece of DNA that is integrated in the recipient organism, and is the one that I will address mostly, because this is an approach that is mostly used in Europe and is more complex, and the protein-based method that allows the detection and identification of the proteins that are coded by the inserted gene. Critical in the case of DNA-based approach is an analytical flow that has to be followed. Having a good method, having a laboratory, knowing what to search is not enough to have a proper and reliable detection and identification of GMOs and LMOs. There are several components that need to be taken into consideration, and there are pipelines or analytical flows that need to be followed with quality criteria applied in all the steps. Module 3 touch the first part of LMO detection, which is the sampling. Everything starts with a proper sampling. If the sampling is not properly done, the analytical part would not provide any result representing the lot or representing the shipment, the components that need to be tested. The second step, and you will find all the details in the manual, is to be able to obtain a good DNA quality with purity and integrity required to the downstream analytical steps. In module 4, you will have an overview of the techniques that are available for the detection and identification of LMOs. There are different targets that can be selected according to the strategy. What I would like to underline here, and it was mentioned, is that this is a training manual, so it gives explanation, it gives guidance. It cannot and it does not pretend to give the only solution, because the approach and the strategies depends on a series of factors, on the need of the question to be answered, and also the capacity of the laboratory, the number of samples to be analyzed. So there are different technical options that can be followed with some guidance, but always looking at the specific situations, specific countries, and specific laboratory setting. Normally, a strategy for GMO detection starts with understanding the sample, which is the taxon I have present in my sample, and therefore to the question, do I have an LMO or not? A screening test is applied. towards the commonly used regulatory elements or genes or construct. And the only way to specifically identify which LMO I have in the sample is through the use of event-specific methods. Another aspect to be considered is which method shall I apply according to my possibility and my needs. Normally, we use polymerase chain reactions that can be applied in qualitative or in quantitative mode. The manual will provide quite a good number of examples of experimental procedures that have been either validated and widely applied for all the different steps. And I believe that this is all what I wanted to say. The technical details, the content, the richness of the manual, I believe is a task of the reader. So I only want to wish you a fruitful reading. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Magdalena, and again, thank you for reiterating that this manual has been produced by over 300 technical scientists around the world, and it really is a good example of cooperation and goodwill between scientists around the world and having the best possible resource to be used. So thank you very much, and thank you to the JRC for all of your support and in assisting us to finalize the production of the manual and getting the various approvals for us. So we are very thankful for that. We move on now to the next part of the manual. And just as Magdalena said, it really is a global effort. And we will now go on to hear about Module 5 on quality assurance and quality control by a very dear friend and former colleague of mine, Professor Chris Viljoen, the head of School of Biomedical Sciences from the University of Free State in South Africa. So over to you, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Watsi. I just want to confirm that my screen is available, that you can see it.
Yes, we can see your screen very well, and we assume this is the School of Biomedical Sciences.
That's correct. So thank you very much to the organizers, the Secretariat. I will be discussing in brief Module 5, the quality assurance and the quality manual components for quality control. And I want to thank the Secretariat for the training manual. And it really is a great honor to participate in the launch of the manual today, because I think it is a long-awaited next installment of our efforts to actually provide the right resources to countries and to laboratories. I also would like to add as a disclaimer that I was one of the 300 that participated in writing sections of the manual and contributing to editing and revision. And it was really an honor to do so, and it's great to get to the point where we can now actually provide the manual to everybody. So I'm going to talk to the issue of quality assurance and quality control. And the manual really introduces these topics in an integrated fashion in terms of LMO detection. So as we're all aware that quality assurance really talks to the issue that laboratories need to produce results that are reliable, consistent, and accurate, and that the results also need to be comparable between laboratories. In addition to this, there are a number of quality control issues within quality assurance that are important. And it's important that the labs performing LMO detection have minimum criteria in order to be able to meet the performance expectations, not just in their own laboratory, but in laboratories around the world. And so minimum performance criteria should really be harmonized based on what is international best practice. I'm not going to go into the detail in terms of quality assurance, but I simply want to use the slide to just highlight the fact that quality assurance really talks to a comprehensive system that manages lab resources as an integrated function of lab processes to be able to achieve a specific outcome. And in this regard, what the manual actually does is cover the processes from sampling through to reporting. And in conjunction with this, also then the practical aspects of quality assurance and quality control that run in parallel. And it's important, and it's been mentioned by Madalena, that the manual is very comprehensive. And the reason why this is so important, because many people will, for the first time when they're implementing LMO detection, encounter many of these different aspects, especially in developing countries and in the countries that are in Africa. So the training manual really provides a very practical introduction towards quality assurance and quality control in terms of LMO detection. And it covers a number of practical issues, providing guidance on these issues. And these include the laboratory documentation, laboratory organization, spatial orientation, equipment and reagents, considerations for sample processing, and things like non-conformance, root cause analysis, and corrective actions. The manual also talks to the issue of addressing minimum performance criteria and covers the different analytical controls and provides a very comprehensive description, purpose, and expected result of these. And it's probably one of the most comprehensive explanations on analytical controls that I've encountered. It also provides background information and guidance on method validation, as well as proficiency testing. Module 5 of the manual also actually adds in a section on relevant information in terms of the databases that are available to support laboratories in LMO detection. And these include the methods databases, also very importantly, screening matrices databases, and then other relevant databases, including the Biosafety Clearinghouse. So I'm doing a little bit of advertising for the CBD free of charge. I would like to make some reflections on the manual and comment that I'm of the opinion that this manual really provides an excellent introductory guide, comprehensive guide to LMO detection. And it's going to prove most useful in our capacity building initiatives in this regard. I also consider the manual to be a living document, and I'm hoping that future revisions will include additional components such as examples and templates. I think there's one section that could be considered for the future, and this would be LMO quantification. So the training manual is going to be extremely useful as a resource in capacity building. And in this regard, I can speak from experience in capacity building on behalf of the work I've done, and also on behalf of the Southern African Network for GM Detection Laboratories, which is a network for GM detection labs in Southern Africa. So just some background very briefly. SANGL was established in 2010 as a regional network to provide regional training and support in LMO detection. And the network currently consists of 24 laboratories in 12 different countries. And this manual will most certainly be a very, very useful resource in our activities in the region. And so again, I would like to thank the Secretariat for the initiative, and I would like to wish everybody happy reading and hope that you enjoy using the manual. Thank you very much. Oh, my last comment before I forget, sorry, I nearly forgot, is that there are challenges that remain. And while the manual goes a long way towards providing the necessary information we need in capacity building on LMO detection, there is one issue that I would actually like to raise. And that is that equipment and reagents are not necessarily always readily available in developing countries, especially in the countries that I've experienced in Southern Africa. And often we experience that the reagents, when available, are sometimes 2 to 3 times more expensive compared to what would be available in Europe or the US. We also have challenges with agents representing companies that don't always have the technical expertise to provide technical support for the equipment. And lastly, and unfortunately, I have to say that the import requirements within countries can also make it increasingly challenging to be able to bring equipment and reagent into countries. And so we do need to address these, but I'm of the opinion that the manual certainly makes a very positive contribution towards our climb to achieving success. And so again, I would like to thank you all for this, the opportunity, and I would like to encourage you to read the manual and enjoy the read. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. And as you've seen, we've got different perspectives that have really come into putting this manual together. We've heard from a research agency. We are now hearing from an academic agency, and even the next speaker from a competent authority. But also, Chris, I think articulating the challenges is good, and it gives us food for thought. And as we look at the rollout of the manual, these are the kinds of feedback that will be useful. And also to commend the Sangal network and hope that you will share this experience with other regions as well, because I think this is how we keep the manual a living document by allowing these platforms. So thank you very much, Chris. Our next speaker, like I said, will now share the last part of the manual, and this is now from the perspective of a competent authority, and it's Toyin Ajeni Fuja Solebo, and Toyin will talk about the last module and share the perspective from the Nigerian National Biotechnology Development Agency, the competent authority for Nigeria. So Toyin, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon. Good day to everyone there.
Good. We have, can you put it on slideshow?
Yeah, I'm about to do that. Yeah. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to share my perspectives and do some presentation of the module 6 of the manual. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly and see the presentation as well.
Okay, good. So, like I said, I'm happy to be part of the webinar launch of the training manual on the detection and identification of living modified organisms in the context of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. I've been requested to present the synopsis of the Module 6, and I have it here presented. I'll take the slides one after the other. I'm from the National Biotechnology Development Agency in Nigeria, and we have had some form of interactions with the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity over time. So I don't seem to be able to move I'm not able to move my screen. I'm not able to, okay, thank you. Okay, yeah. So I have here a synopsis of Module 6, which is on reporting, the requirements for giving out a good report after the rigorous process of detection and identification of the living modified organisms in any samples that have been presented. The reporting can be described as the end products and as an end point in the process of the detection and identification of living organisms. And it is very important that proper presentation of the results is provided to the requesting authority. The reporting activity is designed to confirm that the process of the detection and identification is reliable, and sometimes you are required to give the quantification of the LMOs that are in the samples that have been provided. The outcome of the rigorous process needs to be communicated back officially, particularly in the case of LMO regulatory bodies. And I want to say that for scientists or researchers, the objective of the same procedures that have been carried out in the identification and detection of LMOs will be mainly to ascertain that the samples have been modified.
Okay, it looks like Toyin is frozen. Okay.
And these standards are also national regulations and practices. And the training manual from the STBD has tried to capture this very well. The report is usually prepared as a written document to inform the requesting authority on the presence or otherwise of specific LMOs in the sample, either for qualitative or quantitative determination. The reports can be customized based on national regulatory requirements and the laboratory's policy. There are also some key elements that ensures the manual has tried to highlight some of the essential key elements that will ensure that the report is thorough and comprehensive, which we'll go into right now. So how do you prepare a good report? All these have been extracted from the manual to provide a good resource for whoever will be referencing it. So in preparing for a good manual, a good report, the manual tells us that we need to have a compilation of a good case file that enables that the data and samples are traceable to the main reports. Then we have a case submission information. The case file will contain a case submission information that contains the request as submitted with the samples by the requesting authority. The details that will be contained in the case submissions include the date of sample receipts, name and contact of the requesting authority, description of the items such as sample type, matrix, and weight, name and contact of the laboratory receiving officer, the chain of custody, and packaging. Also, the case file number can be assigned to the sample. Then also you need to have a proper documentation of the test and analysis that will be carried out on the samples. And this is what we refer to in the manual as the test record information. So based on these activities, these laboratory analysis are based on the specific requests of the requesting authority, recorded on standard work forms that have been designed by each of the laboratories to facilitate the traceability of the raw data. These data are also required while drafting the reports. Also, we have, at the end of the day, we have a case report that includes the initial case file submission and the test record information, and all this becomes a component of the report when it's to be issued. So what are the key elements in the LMO analysis reports writing? Well, first we have the introductory section that describes the instructions from the requesting authority, which could be government, a laboratory, or individual clients or corporate organization. And then we have whether it's a qualitative or quantitative request for qualitative or quantitative analysis. Then we have a summary of the sample handling procedures that was used in the course of the identification and detection and all the processing steps that were carried out. Then we also have a summary of how the samples were prepared, description of the method that were used to investigate the presence of LMOs, making reference to specific procedures that were adopted, the laboratory reference number, specific screening matrices that were used to analyze the results, the specificity and sensitivity of the methods that were performed. That is the limits of detection and limits of quantifications, depending on the methods applied. The results of the analysis is a description and interpretation of the findings. The use of terminologies that are easy to understand. The results must use terminologies that are easy to understand to avoid confusion. Sometimes some of these terminologies could be explained in a glossary or appendix that could be included in the results. And the results also provide a context that recognizes the limitations of the methods performed. Then if quantitative analysis data was generated, the value may be provided as relative or absolute values with accompanying calibration curves or standard reference material used could be mentioned. Once the result is compiled, there's a process of technical review. The review serves to double check that the records of the analysis that confirms the validity of results and conclusions before issuance of the reports to the requesting authority. This ensures that the appropriate analyses were actually conducted, the conclusions are reasonable, consistent with the documented data, and valid within the constraints of validated scientific knowledge. The technical review also ensures that appropriate technical language is used and the report is clear, accurate, and complete. there's the need to also accompany that there is sufficient supporting documentation in the reports. After the technical review comes an administrative review. The administrative review tries to ensure that the content of the report actually follows the laboratory policy and procedures and checks for clerical errors. The administrative review also checks that the technical review was properly conducted and documented. In issuing out the reports on completion and documentation of the technical and administrative reviews, the report needs to be signed by the authorized signatories who takes responsibility for the contents of the reports according to the laboratory policy. The report would include the signature of the authorized signatories, the dates, title or position, and printed name and laboratory name, and the dates the reviews were made. Copies of the issued reports should also be retained within the time frame stipulated in the laboratory policy. Sometimes in the case of an amendment to be made to the report after being issued, this could be communicated in the form of supplementary reports that quotes the original reports as a reference. If it is necessary to actually issue a replacement report, this could be uniquely identified and should contain a reference to the original documents which it is replacing. So that's basically what the synopsis of the content of the Module 6 of the technical training manual. But on some of the perspectives on the usefulness and other things that could come up from the publication of this manual is that there are actually increasing activities in the development and adoption of living modified organisms globally. And with these developments comes some changes and developments even in the technologies of the production of the genetically improved organisms, such as the gene editing techniques, which with discussions going on the applicable levels of regulation. In all of these, the need for an harmonized network for LMO detection and identification for regulatory, trade, and traceability purposes cannot be overemphasized, in keeping with the objective of the Cartagena Protocol, and which some of the participants at this webinar have been involved in one way or the other. So this had been the objective of various agencies such as the JRC, the SCB, the NABDA, CGB, and the National Biosafety Management Agency that have been working in synergy. Taking into cognizance regional priorities and approaches, training needs, collaboration opportunities, and future needs and future steps. The Biosafety Technical Series 05 is actually a convergent point and a tool for enhancing these efforts at harmonization. These efforts should be taken further in the various regional networks that had earlier been established, even though most of these networks are actually fledgling and still trying to find their feet to be able to deliver on the purpose for which they were established. So this final slide is a view of some of the information we have on the existing networks in Central Africa, which was being anchored by Roger, East African network by Joyce, the South African network being anchored by Chris, and the West African network being anchored by Usman. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toyin, and again, thank you for sharing with us this important last step in the whole detection and identification phase, because without the report and the interface with the rest of the value chain, it would be science in vain. So thank you for highlighting this, and again for letting us know about some of the concerns and the future, and how we can take this program of work forward. So Eshego, and that was a very good presentation. So
Thank you very much.
you've now heard and seen the manual in its entirety, and we've seen the technical aspects. We've been introduced to the quality assurance, and finally to the reporting. And you can see that it's been a tremendous amount of work done by this collaboration. And going forward, we have a model of how we can work together at a global level and produce outputs that are very practical and pragmatic at the local level. So this really is a proud moment for the biosafety community as a whole, and in particular for the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. We will now have some reactions and responses from different perspectives, but again, just representing views, and the idea is to get a sense of how this manual could be made even more useful and how it can be applied. To kickstart those discussions, I will ask for reflections from Sarah Agapito, who's a research professor, and she will give a research perspective. So Sarah, over to you.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Secretariat for this invitation to provide a brief comments on the manual. And also already starting by congratulating the Secretariat and its collaborators for developing this document, which shows great improvement from the earlier version. I have prepared a brief comments, and I would like to share these with you. So on Module 1, it is very useful as it sets the context of detection and identification within the Cartagena Protocol. It also highlights the relevance of detection and to the implementation of the different articles. So this was missing in the first version, so it was a great addition. On Module 2, there are two sessions which I would like to highlight because of the importance. There is a session on considerations for national strategies towards detection and identification of LMOs. It is a very helpful session for countries starting these activities. And I can give you a concrete example, as we are at the final stages of approval of a JEF FAO project for the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol in the Kyrgyz Republic. And we will certainly use this training material as a resource. There's also another session on Module 2 called Challenges in LMO Detection and New Technology Development, which is also very useful. It's useful for parties to understand that these challenges are recognized by also other parties. And this might encourage, for example, bilateral or multilateral collaboration in the field. It also recognizes the need for developers of LMOs to provide information and material to parties to be able to develop or validate the methods. Moving to modules 3, 4, and 5. So these are very comprehensive, technical and practical, and with practical examples, which is also very useful. It brings information on the most ready and easy to use methods for parties with low infrastructure and resources, but it also touches on more sophisticated techniques for parties with advanced systems, for example. Within these modules, I would like to highlight the text on digital PCR, which is very important. So some parties which are at the front of these developments, such as the EU, for example, they are seeing digital PCR as a potential future gold standard technique for LMOs detection, as it can overcome some technical problems, for example, with sensitivity of some tests and for resolving some quantification issues, for example, of small nucleotide changes. So lastly, a suggestion for a future update of this document would be a dedicated session on DNA sequencing strategies, as it has been discussed by scientists, also some parties, as useful, for example, in resolving some inconclusive identification results, like in disputes or conflicting situations. So with this, I would like to congratulate once again the team working on this manual, and also good reading for those that haven't read the manual yet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was very good feedback for us. And it's also good to see that the manual is providing a good resource for resource mobilization and for advancing the protocol implementation at country level. So thank you for those inputs. And the next speaker will share with us some industry perspective. And we have Mr. Ray Shilito, who's a senior expert in regulatory science, seeds and traits. Ray, if you will take the floor.
If I can figure out how to turn my microphone on. Oh, I'm on. Okay, thank you. First, as Sarah said, thank you very much for inviting me, and hello. Thank you to the hosts. For those who may not know, I'm a senior expert at BSF's regulatory science team in seeds and traits. I'm located in North Carolina, USA. And yes, you can share my webcam. So I've been a member of the International Grain Trade Coalition delegation to convention for many years, and officially a member of the CBD network of laboratories, and been an advocate for internationally harmonized standards. In fact, I'm the chair of ISO TC34 SC16 molecular biomarkers, which among its standards have standards which are in fact mentioned in here on GMO detection, LMO detection. In background in terms of capacity building, we did about 25 workshops on sampling detection of LMOs at the request of governments between 2003 and 15, and some of these in collaboration with the JRC. So we really appreciate the need for a manual. In fact, we've recently produced a comprehensive book on detection methods for plant biotechnology, and if I can figure out how to share my screen, I could share the front of that cover for that book. We are going to try and make that book available at a reasonable cost to all of the parties to the convention. In fact, if we have a physical meeting, we may bring along copies for that. So that's the idea. As far as the draft manual is concerned, it's greatly improved, as Sarah said, from the previous drafts, and indeed gives an excellent comprehensive review of the field. And I very much appreciate the work done to bring the draft to completion. I'm not able to give comments at the present document on behalf of the IGTC, given the short notice, and therefore any comments I provide will be on a personal basis. One question that we did have was about procedure, and this is being launched as a manual. And if I look back at decision CP 816 and also from the decision 911 from the 2018, it appears that the Secretariat was supposed to produce a yeah, so which screen it's going to show, let's see. Yes, that one. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the book that will be actually published in about it goes to press in June, so I assume July time. And what we did was to bring together all of the workshops that we did over those 12, 15 years and try and bring together all of that knowledge into a book. And so this book will be available And a lot of this book will overlap with what is in the manual. But I think it gives a somewhat different perspective, and there is additional materials there. For instance, a chapter I wrote on reference materials and international standards and things like that. So this could be quite interesting to attendees. And if anybody's interested, they can contact me. Thank you. So I need to not share anymore. If that's stop sharing the screen. There we go. Okay, so that's one thing we've done to try and contribute. So the one thing about the decisions that were in progress, I have we'd like some clarity of whether this is a draft for approval by the parties, as was mentioned in the previous decisions, or whether this is launch of official manual. So that's something I think needs to be maybe clarified for parties and for those that have been involved. Reference was made to the involvement of the network laboratories at the beginning of the webinar. However, in spite of the involvement of 300 scientists, the network, the whole laboratory network was not included in the production. And as a member of the network, I was surprised when this came out. I would think that the inclusion of the developers of these products would have been maybe useful, and there are certain things in there which I think we could have contributed to. Thank you. In terms of the technical areas, there's a few things I'd like to see. ISO has now published a couple of standards which might be of interest to this group. One is on subsampling, which was led by the Japanese group. And this is on basically statistical evaluation of subsamples. And I think most people will know about CCalc and how that works. And this is an ISO standard. The second one, which was alluded to, and I looked in the manual, there is a section on this, and I think we can really contribute to that, is that there is ISO 22942, which is on isothermal polymerase chain reaction and the general requirements. So that will be useful, I think, to everybody as we move towards some of these isothermal methods. I have some comments on sampling, on what the most appropriate ISO standard would be on that, and I can provide that. And then I have some questions on the inclusion of leaf tissue or non-viable tissue, as this is supposed to be a viable LMOs as well. So that's another area I think needs clarification. And one thing I was concerned about was the inclusion of phenol chloroform purification as a method. We and everybody else, I think, and I think maybe the WHO would agree on this, that phenol chloroform purification is something that needs to be strongly discouraged. And I think this could be made clearer in the manual. The other things, I think, one other thing that came up, and I was interested to see Chris's comment, and one of the things that we really found out in doing a lot of workshops was that this manual really relies heavily on quantitative PCR, on real-time methods, which may not be available, in fact, appropriate, and is not used even in some well-developed jurisdictions. And so there may be challenges that people would face in real-time PCR. I know, in fact, we even have problems getting machines looked after in Brazil, for instance. And the other thing is, as I say, there's a thing on the databases. I like the fact the databases are in there. We appreciate that the crop life database was mentioned, at least, not very widely. One thing about that database that you may not know is it provides links to where protein detection methods can be obtained. And so I think that could be included. It really is focused, this manual tends to be focused very much on DNA. And the final question I have, and is one that came up in development of the Codex document back in 2010, and it's still a question, and that is the ambiguous results you get when you have multiple replicates and they come out differently, and yet it's still considered a positive, even though it doesn't meet the criteria above the limit of detection. And so this is critical in determining presence, absence of LMO, and this was actually, I would say, in the report writing area, this may be important. So overall, it's a great document. I think there's a lot in there that people can use. It can be a good basis, and I think it can be improved. And I'd like to know what the procedural process is with this, whether it's a draft or a final version. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you for sharing the industry perspective. And I apologize, I'm unable to control the noise outside. But thank you for these very important inputs, and we look forward to receiving some of those elements that you've highlighted, and we can always make use of them in future iterations. And just to clarify that it is, I think with this noise, let me move on to the next speaker, Ms. Galina Mokzova, the head of the National Coordination Biosafety Center for the Institute of Genetics and Cytology. Galina, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, Galina, loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to provide reaction and comments on the training manual. And of course, thank you for enjoyable reading. First, when I read, I've admitted that this is a very carefully thought out manual and of a high quality. It seems as if a diligent student is carefully recording for himself and the most important points that will help him in both the choice of method in the PCR and in the calculation of results and in the laboratory work on the LMO detection in general. And because it is done for itself, you can see not only the work that's been done to describe how LMOs are detected and identified, but you can also take into account all the little things that lead to the success in the laboratory detection of LMOs and that are going to make the difference. From our country, we certainly looked forward for such a guidance, and mostly importantly, as we saw from Model 1, for the first time an explanation is given on how important the field of detection and identification is for the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol, explaining which article it supports. Also that I noticed that attention is given on how this system could be implemented at the national level and explanation of the different options are given. This is very important, both from the point of view of training laboratory staff to understand these issues and also of a particular importance, especially now when parties are developing a global framework, the Cartagena Protocol implementation and action plan. And this gives insight into the particular importance of this area in matters of traceability, monitoring and control of LMOs. From my point of view, all chapters are written very well at a very affordable level and allow students, laboratory staff to remind themselves of all stages of LMO detection, as well as to get acquainted with the essence of the process of creating LMOs. I think that explanatory figures and tables are provided in the right places. They really help to highlight and compile the right information, somewhere to remind the reader important points, for example, about the structure of certain chemicals, process of DNA replication, issues that may happen during the PCR, and which substances may influence on its productivity. I found many such tips. It really looks like a good, very dedicated student try to put on the fields of his notebook the most important things that will make his laboratory life easier. And special thanks for a very carefully written chapter on sample preparation. It's of course would be interesting to read Raymond's book, but when I read in this book, I noticed that this chapter written very carefully. In many relevant books, this entry point that is crucial for receiving precise and accurate results of screening and identification is underestimated. I think this is not the case in this particular manual. Also, it is great that you introduce into the quality control and quality standards need for proficiency testing and links to the reference institutions where countries can make such collations, and introduce databases that can help with LMO identification and bioinformatic tools and matrices. Though all chapters are written very carefully, and we certainly at our National Coordination Biosafety Center will disseminate this manual among our regional laboratories on GMO detection, as well as we will use this manual in our laboratory, which is accredited for LMO detection and identification, for training our staff and students. We, of course, will recommend this tool for biosafety laboratory classes at university, the number of which is increasing, and in our master degree courses on synthetic biology, and of course to the CE region. I would also like to mention that since the number of unauthorized events in our country, especially in food based on laboratory diagnostics, has increased during the past decade, our center last year took a biosafety commitment to develop a standard operation procedure and also to publish the book on unauthorized LMO detection within the national context. And we also look in the same direction, as our book clarifies the great impact exerted by the field of detection to the Cartagena Protocol and Nagoya Protocols implementation, the role of databases and matrices in complex screening schemas. It's about to be finished, and now when we are seeing this wonderful manual, we would of course like to include a link in our book to this manual and describe that this one training manual young people who come into the lab must read. And finally, what I would like to admit that it is very important that this training manual will be translated to other 5 UN languages that will certainly increase its audience and usefulness. We hope in the future for continuation of this series. We support our colleagues Chris and Sarah who told in which direction it could be improved in the future, and we also support that the chapter with regard to the quantification of LMO could be supplemented to some materials, and also probably it would be good to add a certainty evaluation during this process. We also hope that in the future, as this is a living document, we will see methods of detection and identification regarding new varieties of LMOs that are coming to the market, that are developed by new techniques, such as genome editing and synbio organisms, because in the future laboratory staff have to be trained on how to identify them. Thank you very much once again for this wonderful reading, and I encourage our colleagues to read and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Galina. Thank you for your kind remarks, and also thank you for highlighting where the manual could be going to next. So we did have input from UNEP, but unfortunately the speaker had to step out of the meeting, and it was really an input to highlight the role that UNEP Jeff is playing in capacity building, in supporting countries to access GEF resources and to take this work forward, providing support to Sangl and the opportunity that exists in the GEF programming to support more work in this regard. And I think I also wanted to highlight that this manual is being published as a technical series, and as such, a technical series in terms of the way the Secretariat works are really meant to be documents that foster scientific and technical cooperation. They are not negotiated documents. They are really scientific documents and are meant to provide support in that regard. And this is why it's published specifically as a technical series under the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. And the idea is to increase awareness of current issues and concerns and facilitate widespread and effective use of information and technical support. And this is why it's a technical series and why we will share it with the parties in that perspective. I would now like to refer to the questions that we have received and ask our three speakers on the manual to reflect and provide some input in that regard. The first question, I think it can be addressed by Austin, and the question to you, Austin, is perhaps if you can provide information on how the methods and techniques and the process of developing and creating the LMO will be considered in the manual. And in your response, if you can consider if it will be restricted to the outcome or the products of these processes. Over to you, Austin.
Thank you very much for the question. So the manual itself does briefly cover some techniques used to create LMOs. However, it's mostly meant to help parties understand detection and identification, the issues related to detection and identification, rather than the techniques and processes used to create LMOs. The manual was written in the context of the Cartagena Protocol, so it's aligned with that and is done in a way to help parties understand and assist with their obligations underneath the protocol. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin. We have another question, and I think this question perhaps can be answered by all of you, maybe starting with Chris and then Magdalena and Toyin. But the question for Chris is what is to be expected in the case of transboundary movement of GMOs, which are potentially processed into food?
Thank you very much. I think the answer to the question is a very simple one. The manual talks to LMOs specifically in terms of the detection component. So the purpose of the manual is not to try and address a, can I say, a political issue here. And where there is transboundary movement, I think then it is up to the parties to actually decide how this should be dealt with. And I think there are mechanisms in place for that. And I want to really emphasize that the manual has really stayed clear of bringing the laboratories into a difficult regulatory environment. And I think we must make a very clear distinction on this. The purpose of the manual is to actually elaborate on the process that should be followed by the testing laboratory. And that should not be confused with a regulatory decision. And so my simple answer is, that is for the regulator to actually determine, and it's not for the testing laboratory. And I think it's very important that we make that distinction, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And Magdalena, I think the next part of the question would be for you. how to deal with the different legal classifications when using new breeding technique organisms that are considered GMOs in the EU, but are not regulated in other countries.
Yes, thank you for the question. This is a crucial question that is at the discussion also in Europe. In relation to the manual is a technical training manual that takes into consideration all the procedures that need to be applied when an LMO is constituted by the physical insertion of a new piece of DNA into the recipient organism. And as of today, this is what the manual includes. The same can be applied, provided that the detailed information is possible, for example, using CRISPR system or gene editing techniques, whenever the result is a physical insertion of DNA. Because in that case, provided the information is detailed, you can identify what to detect. Different is when we talk about minor mutations that cannot be distinguished with the current techniques included in the manual or with the real-time PCR or PCR in general. And in that case, sequencing, to my understanding, would be more detailed, but there is, and that is one of the discussion also in Europe, there is always a difficulty on understanding if the change is an intentional change or is a casual mutation naturally occurring. So from the European point of view, and this is agreement also within the European Network of GMO Laboratory, there is no complete technical solution for the new mutations, new LMOs produced when there is no clear distinction between what could happen in nature and what has been produced by intended modification.
Thank you very much, Madalena. And then there was a part for Toyin regarding how then would you write up and how would you recommend dealing with transboundary movement and reporting. Toyin?
Okay, thank you. The transboundary movement, I would like some clarification. The transboundary movements of processed or unprocessed materials.
Mm-hmm.
No, I want to, I don't know if I can get a clarification on that from the person.
So the question was on the processed. But,
okay,
you can answer from both perspectives. I think it will still be useful.
Oh, okay. So I think the reporting on unprocessed depends on one, the request by the information required by the requesting authority. What information do they want? Is it qualitative or quantitative? That is it an LMO or it is not? Or is it asking if there's a particular targeted sequence, if it is present in the sample? So it depends on what the requesting authority wants. So it's either qualitative in terms of presence or absence of the LMO, or the presence of specific target sequences. So those are the things that might be in the reports that would be presented. And then for the processed sample, like it's still the same thing, because sometimes some regulatory bodies still want to trace further that some of the approved LMOs in the country are probably contained in some other processed foods or maybe some unauthorized LMOs are also present. So sometimes those tests are carried out, and then it depends on the level, the intention of the authority or whoever is carrying it out. Because for the processed foods, it may also be required you give the information to the level of the quantity of the LMO present in the sample. So it depends on what actually the authority or whoever is requesting for the information wants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toyin. And getting still on the subject of the new breeding techniques, they seem to be very popular. And I think we have some perspective from Ray and Sarah. So Ray and then Sarah. Are you there, Ray?
Yes, okay. Now, I see I'm unmuted now, yes. So the question of detection of new breeding technologies really depends on a couple of things. As Madalena said, if it's a large insertion, then really it's just looking at a GMO, and that's a global sort of approach. With small changes, the EU is on, they published an excellent summary and analysis of that a year or two ago, and I know there was something came out of Germany too. So I just actually, we published a paper last September in Vitro Plant, which is a journal of the SIBB, in a special issue on new breeding technologies or genome editing, and we did deal with some of those issues. There are challenges because of very small changes but some of, the sort of overlapping, I would say, requirements for a method still stand. That is, so a lot of what's in the manual can be applied. Again, it depends because there's a lot of discussion at the protocol level on what these new breeding technologies, where they stand, and there's a lot of disagreement across the world. So that will be complicated, and each country or each trading organization is going to have to deal with it. The question of sequencing is a good one. We use sequencing on a regular basis on the original LMO we generate, or on the original new breeding technology or mutation or whatever we generate. And the point is that that's all very well in single plants or maybe 5 plants or up to 10 plants. But when we get into testing shipments of grain or seed or whatever, LMOs across boundaries, then these are usually in bulk, and it's going to be very difficult to apply sequencing technologies because of the inherent mutability of plant DNA anyway. So it's going to be a really challenging situation unless you know what you're looking for. And so there's no screening methods. And one of the issues, and I remember I gave a talk to the ASEAN authorities last fall, and the question was, what are we going to do about this? Because capacity is going to be a huge issue. And so if you're going to put these, if somebody puts these regulations into place, then the capacity building is going to be enormous, and the capacity needs is going to be enormous, and it's already stretched by what we're doing on LMOs. So I would just caution people to think about that. How are we going to deal with this? Because there's no screening method. You can't use 35S, you can't use NOS. There's no screening. Each event is individual, or each product is individual. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ray, and we will make that paper available, so perhaps you can share it with Austin as well, so we can add it on the BCH. Sarah, are you able to provide a response on this topic as well? Thank you, Sarah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, on the topic on new breeding techniques and their detection and identification, I would just like to share with the audience that we have approved a research project, a 4 years research project with the Research Council of Norway, dealing exactly with the issue of detection and identification of gene-edited organisms within the context of the food chain. we are considering in this project not only the EU regulations, but also the requirements under the Cartagena Protocol. So if there are attendees who are interested in hearing more about this project, we have a website and our contacts there. It's called footprintproject.org. We have just started. We are starting with developing material for then testing our approaches and methods. Thank you, Watse, for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you very much, Sarah. And the last set of questions, perhaps Austin will respond to them. And it's questions about translation and also how to identify certified labs within countries. Austin?
Hi, thank you for the question. So regarding the translations, the French, Spanish, Arabic, Russian, and Chinese versions are forthcoming. The work is advanced, but there is still a little left to do. So they will be available as soon as possible, and you can find them on the Biosafety Clearinghouse in the VLR record 260177. But at the moment they're not complete, but hopefully we'll have them published soon. And regarding the accredited labs, users can find information on detection laboratories, also on the BCH, searching for reference records and searching for labs. So for example, in Egypt, there are 3 labs that are listed in the BCH. However, you can search by any country that you like, and we have a lot of easy to use filters to narrow down your search. So I strongly recommend that you visit the BCH and find out more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Austin. And again, thank you to all of our speakers today and the respondents and all the participants for this webinar. We really are so excited that we have this new product that is really meant to support countries at the practical level to advance implementation of the protocol. And so this has really been a great pleasure for us to have you all participate in the launch. And if you have any needs for follow-up discussions, we stand ready and available to support you in any way to take this work forward. This manual is a complete and exhaustive publication and really is something which we hope in the post-2020 implementation plan and the overall post-2020 global biodiversity framework, that there will be many more opportunities for the network of detection laboratories and other laboratories to come on board and be part of this process. Just these last few minutes, the discussions on new breeding techniques have already shown that the scope of the living manual is much wider, and there's plenty of opportunity for this work to continue to advance. And so there's definitely going to be future iterations on a number of elements that we will identify as we go. The time allocated to this webinar has finished, unfortunately, although there were still a few more questions that were coming in. Please feel free to send your questions through to the Secretariat, and we will attempt to respond or find you answers. Again, I'd like to invite you to go to the Biosafety Clearinghouse and access more information if you need any, and continue to support the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. So thank you very much. The manual is officially launched and the webinar is closed. Thank you.